anxiety ridden somewhat, right? We're waiting for the Supreme Court to say something about affirmative action, something with some finality, an opinion. And today I'm going to share with you how I've learned to deal with this, because it's going to happen this week, right? It's got to happen this week unless they say, hey, we're going to wait till Christmas. We really want to spoil, how people relate to each other. And we don't want to spoil July 4th, the July 4th holiday. Well, we'll spoil Christmas time. No, they're not going to do that. But this is how I've learned to deal with this. Because I'm from California. I live in California. There is no race-based college admissions in California allowed. It's against the law. Affirmative action was banned. And when I realized that, I realized that, hey, I can deal with whatever the Supreme Court throws at me. We'll talk about that today. Hello, everyone. It's Emil Guillermo. Emil, Amok to you. My takes on all things considerable. This is called Emil Amok's Takeout. I got a take on this SCOTUS thing. Go to my ALDEF blog at Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, the website there, ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog, because it is a tease. It is a tease. They're going there. And today they had a big ruling, right? You think this is a 6-3 conservative court, and that's going to be, I've learned something during this delay. I'm going to share that with you today, that I have learned. I mean, if nothing else, these last few weeks have shown that the court is really unpredictable. You can, I mean, Emil, we know that, Emil. I know, but when the court went 6-3, the 3 liberal ladies and the 6 conservatives, people thought, oh, well, it's going to be rigid. We're going to know exactly what this court's going to do. We don't know what this court's going to do. I mean, you can see just from the last few weeks, the Voting Rights Act, they've upheld it after the conservatives have pretty much whittled away at it. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act upheld. They said, we're going to let those Alabama, now Louisiana, you better withdraw those maps. It's looking a little too fishy that there are no black districts there. So that's a good sign. That shows that the justices, they like democracy. And then today, they surprise people, because if you assume that it's a right-wing court, well, let's go to Axios, which is it's sort of everyone's favorite Cliff Notes on American news. The Supreme Court today rejected one of Republicans' most audacious attempts to control elections, reports Axios, in a 6-3 decision. The justice said state election laws can be challenged in court, a rebuke to a burgeoning conservative movement that has sought to block the courts from hearing such cases. A group of North Carolina GOP lawmakers had asked the court to embrace a sweeping legal theory called the independent state legislature doctrine. The theory holds that state legislatures have total control over their state's election rules, including the procedures that govern presidential elections. The Supreme Court rejected that argument in one of the highest profile cases of the term, Moore v. Harper. The Constitution, quote, does not insulate state legislatures from the ordinary exercise of state judicial review, Chief Justice Roberts wrote for the court's majority. And so, according to Axios, the big picture, this case concerned gerrymandering in North Carolina. The state's Supreme Court ruled that new congressional and state legislative maps were unconstitutional beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, you see, suddenly the court seems reasonable, and this is like a 6-3 decision against the right. So many of us who've been looking at affirmative action saying, oh, the court, 6-3 affirmative action, or 6-3 conservative court, it's going to sink affirmative action. not so fast. So that's one of the things I think we can take away from the slow drip of cases coming out of the court. You try to predict the court, it's hard. It's very difficult to. There was you think it's going to be 6-3 conservative. It's not. So I am just sort of like, we have to play wait and see. And here's the thing. It dawned on me as I was waiting all these weeks. Hey, California hasn't had affirmative action since 1995. Well, 95 was the ballot initiative. And then came 96 when it was just outlawed. So I'm not so sure anymore what can happen. And if whatever they say at the Supreme Court is going to change our posture in terms of the fight for equity in college, in at the workplace, in public employment, I think there's still going to be a fight that continues. There's still going to be a debate, but I have learned to deal with this dreaded decision that should come down the pike any second, any day. Certainly, they promised it before the summer recess. Got to be this week. But now, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, I got some fun things to talk about. I'm going to talk about my plum tree. Your plum tree, Emil? Yeah, there's just something about, I got a plum tree that keeps on giving. It makes me kind of like a gentleman farmer. I go out there, I pick things in my own yard. So it's okay to be a fruit picker in your own yard. And then I learned something about the value of nutrition from my plums. And they always come around this time. So I know whenever I feel like, I got to have a candy bar, I have to have some kind of sugar or something, I know I just got to go out and pick my plums. And all right, I'll talk about that. I'll talk about a couple of the things that caught my eye today. Rob Schneider blowing up the internet because he made a presidential endorsement. You say, who's Rob Schneider, Emil? Well, he's a Filipino American. I mean, he doesn't play that up so much. His mother is Filipino. He's a guy from Saturday Night Live, funny guy. He's being pushed by Fox, his latest stand-up special. But he's come out for, we'll talk about that. Those tapes, CNN got tapes of Donald Trump. We talk about it, and people are upset. But it's weird. I'll tell you why I think something's weird. Marianne Williamson. I like to talk about Marianne Williamson. I'll get into that later. And let's see, I mentioned Ryan Seacrest. Okay, so let's talk about this SCOTUS thing. Now, one of the good things about the delay is that other things have come out. And, other reporters are doing stories and they're trying to time it just right. It's sort of like market timing the stock market, sometimes you're ahead of the game. You're saying, it's going to happen. It doesn't happen. Oh, now I got to write another story about how it's going to happen and it hasn't happened. So a number of people have written stories like that. In the meantime, the stories by people who are focusing on the court have been really very enlightening. For example, if you've been following the ProPublica reporting on the Supreme Court justices, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito, and their failure to disclose their gifts from billionaire Republican donors, then you know at least one thing. The judges, who make a base pay of around $285,000, believe in affirmative action to Supreme Court justices, at least on the basis of class, not race. Or I'm wondering, are these gifts seen akin to a scholarship or a fellowship? Because the only ship involved seems to be a yacht on which Thomas and his wife, Virginia, Jenny Thomas, spent 9 days cruising Indonesia, a $500,000 vacation paid for by billionaire Republican Harlan Crow. So, this stuff comes out just like while we wait for the Supreme Court to rule on affirmative action. So I guess the question is, do the justices, after they get theirs, believe in a little affirmative action for everyone else too? I guess. So that's just one of the things that have come out as the High Court plays out its grand finale of the year, a grand finale of boom, 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 right? This is it, right? Yet to come this week, we've got the decision on the Biden plan to forgive up to $10,000 in federal student loan debt for people with incomes below $125,000 a year. And I will tell you that being relieved of $10,000 in federal student loan debt for my kids, because they passed on the debt to parent loans. I mean, I would be grateful to see something like that. And then there's the LGBTQ rights case, in which a Christian website designer refused to create wedding websites for same-sex couples. That's yet to come in the next few days. There already have been some surprising decisions, as I mentioned, about the Supreme Court, the very conservative court upholding the Voting Rights Act. Alabama, Louisiana, told to redraw those maps to allow for greater black voter representation. So there's a lot of surprises. There's a lot yet to come. But of course, as Asian Americans, this is the micro talk show of the AAPI and the AAX, fill in your ethnicity, or the ALLs, all's the rest of you. Asian Americans are waiting for this one case involving Harvard and the University of North Carolina and their use of race in college admissions, because it could mean the end of what we know as affirmative action. Now, this is a case where anti-civil rights advocates led by Ed Blum gathered up Asian Americans he found on the internet, right? He was trolling for them. Hey, have you been rejected? He was an ambulance chaser. And they all came to him, and they were all like, recent vintage in terms of their immigration status. And he used them to claim the admissions process is discriminatory. But it's also the same admissions process that has resulted in recent Harvard freshman classes near 30% Asian American. So I think my position has always been someone should send the aggrieved a reality check. Like, it's okay to go to your backup school when your backup school is Yale or Amherst or UCLA or whatever. Being rejected from Harvard is not as big a deal as you think. It's not discrimination when, in fact, the law says you can use race in a narrowly tailored way. Oh, now they say, it's not narrowly tailored, or whatever they're saying. So, but to Blum and the anti-civil rights activists, the so-called, what I call the Asian American aggrieved, the AAAs, Asian American aggrieved. I mean, they were the perfect victims, providing a yellow face for whites like Blum trying to bring down affirmative action. If the court bans the use of race, as I said, we already know what happens based on the experience of my home state, California. Because in the most Asian state in the nation, affirmative action ended in 1996 when California passed a ballot initiative deceptively called the Civil Rights Initiative. Remember, Ward Connerly was out there, banging the drum. He wanted to take it to Michigan. I think he was successful there. He wanted to take it nationwide. This was his vision back in 1996. I had several conversations with Connerly back then. It's all civil, but we very vehemently disagreed. Now get this. Since then, in 1996, the underrepresented minority population in the state has gone up 7.4%. But the college enrollment at the University of California, Berkeley has only gone up 1.7%. The gap still exists, according to the Chronicle of Higher Education, their analysis. The Chronicle's analysis also shows that of the 10 states that have banned affirmative action, 5 states saw a growing gap between their underrepresented population and in-state underrepresented minority enrollment at selective institutions. 5. 3 states, the gap shrank. 2, the gap stayed the same. But in 5 out of the 10, 50% of the 10 states that have banned affirmative action, that gap has only increased. So you might say the situation is still bad without affirmative action. But look, California has had this since 1996. Here we are. It's not the end of the world. The lesson is we're still going to have to find a better way to assure equity. We're still going to have to keep fighting, no matter what the Supreme Court says. So that's helped me. That's helped me deal with this dreaded opinion that's coming down any day now, any moment now. And I think, so the Chronicle of Higher Education looked at the number of underrepresented college-age folks in those states versus the actual number of those people who are in college, and they saw the gap. But you consider some other numbers, and there are some alarms. There's some things that we need to be worried about. For example, the Asian American numbers went way higher. It's now up to 40% Asian American at some of the UC schools, University of California campuses. Now imagine if that happens at Harvard, where the freshman class is already nearing 30% Asian American. What if it goes up to 40? I mean, if whites currently dropping from over 50% to down to somewhere in the 40% range, if they drop to 30%, will Ed Blum be trolling for aggrieved whites to sue Harvard for letting in all the Asians that got in during the first prolonged lawsuit? I think what we're seeing here is this demographic, the impact of the demographics, the modern demographics, after the years of affirmative action. We are seeing white supremacy evolving into white preservation. 30% whites at Harvard? I mean, it's not like whites don't already get benefit from affirmative action for legacies, mostly white, and high donors, mostly white. Trump-in-law Jared Kushner got into Harvard after his father made a multi-million-dollar donation to the school. And what about all the poor whites? See, this is the thing. If whites drop to 30%, you just talk about the legacies and the high donors who are white. That could be it for whites. You got to wonder about all those people who are conservative, who want to be morally correct. And they say, affirmative action and race consciousness would be bad. But what about those poor whites, that conservatives keep pining for? They're looking out for the young J.D. Vances of the world who must have their hillbilly epiphanies in Harvard Yard. So, let's face it, white affirmative action has always been a thing. If there's one thing to take away from this whole ordeal that has taken years, it's that it took Asian Americans to crack the process wide open and make us all see the reality. But wouldn't it be funny if the white population drops to 30% and now Ed Blum is looking for whites to sue Harvard and its Asians for being discriminatory against whites? That's when we live in an odd world. what's odder yet is we are waiting for this conservative SCOTUS bench, the justices, to make their decision, and they are poised this week to be the arbiters on affirmative action. But as I said, it won't be the last word. I mean, I don't see how it can. It ended in California. And as California becomes more Asian and becomes the most diverse state in the union, how do you not take race into account? How is it? I mean, do you settle for just the accidental occurrence that someone is going to be sensitive to what? If you can't say it, if you can't use it, if you have to be colorblind. You know, we talked about all of this in 95, 96, when people were trying to defeat that so-called civil rights initiative. And then I guess we just learned to live with it. And the Asian American numbers rose to 40%. So, as I said, when you apply all this nationwide, we won't, whatever the Supreme Court says, it won't be the last word. It will not be the last word. Yesterday, if you go to show 546, I go over, the New York Times does this thing where they have two op-ed columnists talk to each other, Gail Collins and Bret Stephens. I'm more a Gail Collins fan than a Bret Stephens fan. You can hear how I commented yesterday on show 546. It was online yesterday. It's in the print version today while we wait for the Supreme Court. It's interesting, though, because in their conversation about it, they don't really touch anything really major, except I will say this. There are 2 points. One, Bret Stephens makes. He says something to the effect that, and he says something that I've said, this is a resource problem. How are you going to have equity if you have like almost 60,000 applicants to Harvard and only 2,000 places? And how are you going to be fair to everyone unless you expand the number of places? I mean, he said something I hadn't heard before in that conversation. He said, maybe we do things online, have an online Harvard that people can go to so that you can accommodate the people you have to reject. It was an idea, but it does speak to the issue of resources. You need more Harvard. How can you get more of it? Unless you do something like that and make some of it virtual that people can attend. And now you can allow many more of those 60,000 who apply each year to Harvard now. Thanks to the standard app, the common app. It's their fault. I mean, in my day, and this is not necessarily a humble brag, but I mean, the acceptance rate now at Harvard is something like, 3%? In my day, it was closer to 9 or 10%. It's gotten more exclusive. I don't think it's gotten better. But it does point out that resource issue. So that's one thing that I don't want to diss what Bret Stephens and Gail Collins did in that conversation while we wait for the Supreme Court. Because Gail Collins said something kind of interesting. Because that usually is overlooked. That it's not a matter of getting all the smart people together. It's not a matter of your straight A's and my straight A's and your perfect scores and my perfect scores. It really is a matter more of people from different backgrounds coming together. Not necessarily aggrieved, but just people of different backgrounds with different stories coming together. which I thought, you know, you don't hear much of that in the discussion or in the debate. What you hear of is, I got straight A's and didn't get in. I was qualified and I didn't get in. I had perfect scores and didn't. You hear that a lot. And it's because of the other guy who is, Asian. He got in. And so, but the whole idea of affirmative action is we're bringing people together to work together. And it just stands to reason that if they're all high functioning, academically oriented, or just, bright kids talking to each other, we want to make sure that they can talk to each other. We want to put them together. It's a lot of people, conservatives, debunk this and say, oh, you're social engineering now. Well, we're creating a campus, to use a phrase, that looks like America, that works like, if it works like America, then it's going to be divided, right? No, we want a campus that is functioning, that shows people of different backgrounds. And that's what Gail Collins mentioned, that I think sometimes gets lost. It's a mixture of these stories, people of different backgrounds. And I bring up my case because when I went there, Asian Americans were not 25, 30% of anything. The Asian Americans I saw there were actually from Asia, actually princes and princesses. And, they were the elite of Asia. Not many people were sons of fry cooks, of a fry cook, like I was. And the real test was, well, we were together. We're in the same place. They were no better. But I had to believe that. Now, there are some critics who say, this is exactly the reason, Emil, why we shouldn't have affirmative action. Because we take some kid like you from the Mission District and we put him from San Francisco, we put you in Harvard Yard. It's cold. You don't like it. No one likes you. No one liked me. But see, this is the thing. It wasn't about, affirmative action isn't about people in class engaging. It could be at the highest level, perhaps. But it's also just people at all levels learning to get along, respecting each other, living with each other, crossing paths. I mean, people say, hey, just think of the networking opportunities. Yeah, I could have gone there and I could have met Vivek Ramaswamy on his, did you see that story about how he was networking his way to his biogenetic empire, biotech empire? I can meet other people who are just greedy and want money so bad and capitalistic. Or I can meet people who are idealistic. I can meet all these types of people that make up America. That's the diversity of America. And we're all getting along and we're crossing paths. That's diversity. That's what it's about. And I was talking to a classmate of mine. I said, we would never talk to each other. We would never be connected if it weren't for having been through that experience. It was like the war. In the 70s, all that, 50 years. I don't know if Steve Ballmer, the Los Angeles Clippers owner, former Microsoft, what would you call him? Microsoft billionaire. I don't know if he'd give me the time of day But the fact that I was in his class, he'll give me a couple seconds where I can say, hey, Steve, how are the Clippers going to do? I think we said more than that. Not much. We crossed paths, but I'm just saying that's part of the reason for affirmative action. I mean, to Ballmer's credit, he was walking around with this young black kid who was, I think he was mentoring. And I think it was a kind of show that in all his years, he had learned something about empathy, about being a human being, about working with other people. It's just one of those things that people don't talk about when they talk about affirmative action. And as I said, when I was reading that piece in the New York Times, while we wait for the Supreme Court, Gail Collins brings it up. It's a good point. It's a point that is rarely brought up. But I can see the critics already saying, hey, look, if it's all social, you know, why don't you make the school be for the straight A kids and then just do more mixers, more social things outside, you know, bring in the kids from public school to do social things. Not the same. It's not the same. But when you're in the class and you're living next door in a dorm in Harvard Yard, makes a difference. And just one more point. To this day, I got a letter just yesterday from a guy I hadn't talked to in 40 some years. He said, oh, Emil, we used to talk at these parties, and I want to tell you about something I'm doing now. These are the kind of things that happen when you cross paths. It happens in a society that's diverse and where people are taught not to avoid each other, but to come together and say, yeah, we're kind of the same, really. So just one of the virtues of affirmative action. Anyway, my column on the ALDEF blog, Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. There's a link on that blog to show 546, which is the show I did yesterday, where I talk about, in more animated form, even more animated than today, about the Gail Collins, Brett Stevens conversation. But I did give Brett Stevens one point. I said, yeah, acknowledging that it is a resource issue, there's got to be some way to grant people that stamp, that Harvard stamp they want, if they're qualified, by doing things virtual or something, maybe. But as long as there's only 2,000 spots at Harvard, there's always going to be a problem that won't be solved until you figure out how to make more Harvards, or until people understand that it's okay to go to your second choice school, your backup school, even if that backup school is Yale. All right, so we're still waiting. I mean, still waiting for the affirmative action. I think if you say, oh, it's going to come, if I say it's going to come Friday, it's going to come tomorrow. That's just the way it is. That's my luck. But in the meantime, there are all these other things that I want to talk about. Ryan Seacrest, Now, here's the thing. I always wanted to be a DJ. Not quite like Ryan Seacrest, but he is sort of like the second coming of Dick Clark. Dick Clark, he was a here is, there is, I don't mind, it's not vapidity, but he's just a presenter, a good looking presenter. And he's making tens of millions of dollars, right? American Idol, Ryan Seacrest doesn't sing. He just says, here is. Wheel of Fortune, Ryan Seacrest doesn't say, I'm as smart as all these puzzles and, vowels and consonants. No, he just says, here it is. And here's Vanna turning the letters. Pat Sajak, when Pat Sajak announced his retirement, I heard reports that he was making somewhere around $30 million a year. Ryan Seacrest, who already has like 2 or 3 jobs where he's making at least that, is now going to be the new host of Wheel of Fortune. And, I'm just thinking, some people have said to me, oh, why is he doing that? Well, it's an easy gig. You go in, you cut a week's, 2 weeks worth of shows in 2 days, and then you go off and do your own thing. And they give you $30 million or so. And you see, when I wanted to be a DJ, that would have been like the cush job. That would have been the thing. That would have been my dream. But somewhere along the line, it was pounded into my head that wasn't good enough. You had to do something hard. You had to do something that was rigorous. Oh, there's that word, rigor, which also means death. I had to do something rigorous. And of course, you go to Harvard and they make you feel like, come on, you got to comp for everything. You got to be, if you're not rigorous, come on. You're going to live with yourself if you're just going to play records. And in my old age, I'm realizing, I should have just kept with that. I should have just kept with that. I actually dropped out of Harvard to be a DJ. And I was wildly successful in Houston, Texas, in the 70s, making all of $3 an hour. That was big back then. Big money. But I gave it up because I said, I got to do something hard. I got to do something rigorous. And so I get the news today, Ryan Seacrest gets the Wheel of Fortune job. Like American Idol isn't enough. Like all his other things not enough. And I'm thinking, God, what kind of rigor goes into being Wheel of Fortune host? It's not like Jeopardy host. But anyway, congratulations to Ryan Seacrest. The other side note I wanted to add on today is Rob Schneider, funny guy, has come out and backed Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And it's sort of coincidental, I guess. I talked to some conservative friends and they say, oh, you for Bobby Kennedy? I said, are you kidding me? I mean, he's dead. Oh, you mean his son? Oh, no. I'm a vaxxer. Six times. Me, vax. And there was that column in the New York Times I talked about yesterday. Farhad Manjoo wrote a column about how do you debate a conspiracy theorist? You don't, especially a charming one whose last name is Kennedy. I mean, you don't debate the facts. You just get out of his way, as Manjoo attested. Said, there's no way I can win this debate. Challenge him on facts. Facts don't matter. He's a Kennedy. I'm not. He's white. I'm not. So Kennedy, I know a lot of people are looking at Kennedy, but when Rob Schneider on Twitter yesterday said he was going to back Bobby Kennedy Jr. Boy, there was like the people on the left said, "Are you crazy? We knew you were conservative. We know that, you're using Fox to like put out your specials and then the people on the right said, "Are you sure this guy is so progressive? Bobby Kennedy's really, except on the vax issue, he's really." And when you do something that is opposite of what people expect, it's just crazy, right? So Rob Schneider gets a lift in his career. Power to Rob is half Filipino on his mother's side. I've met him a couple of times. I think I met his brother more. I remember seeing Rob as he was coming up in the comedian ranks in San Francisco. Wildly successful, and still, movies, trying to make a sustained kind of, it's not really a comeback, but he's trying to say, hey, I was the guy next to the Xerox machine. Hey, Emil Amok, Mr. Amok, man. He's just trying to do his career. But what I notice is funny guys want to be serious, and serious guys want to be funny. I mean, look, Rob Schneider, he'd be great if he just didn't tiptoe out into politics and say, Bobby Kennedy Jr. is my guy. But now he's really stirred up the hornet's nest among Republicans and Democrats, left and right, and maybe it's calculated. I don't know. But he's back on the scene. People notice him now. And power to him. I mean, we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I've always respected him. And I mention him because he is Asian American. You didn't know that, right? His mother. Very lovely woman. I've only seen her, and I haven't met her in person, but I've seen pictures. From the Bay Area, Rob. Causing waves, backing Bobby Kennedy Jr. Now, if I was going to go with a third party, or not a third party, but with a fringe candidate, it wouldn't be Bobby Kennedy. I said this yesterday. It would be Marianne Williamson. I mean, I don't know if she'd make a great president, but if our president thought like Marianne Williamson, if our president led with love and had a perspective of love and not fear, you might see miracles happen in our democracy. You might see people come together. I mean, if the anti-abortionists, the religious right, want to create a modern theocracy, I think the antidote is people adopting the spirituality of a Marianne Williamson, who is she's non-sectarian or non-denominational. She's Jewish, who believes in A Course in Miracles, which is an amalgam of Eastern thought, Jewish thought, Christian thought. She just believes in being good. She doesn't believe in the succession world of things. And we need more people thinking about humanity, love, kindness. I don't know if I'm going to vote for her, but I'm going to continue to read her, and I'm going to continue to talk about her, because she is, you want to talk about breath of fresh air. You want to talk about someone who is saying something that could make a difference policy-wise. I think you got to get to that level where you're talking about people. And you're not just talking about dollars, and you're not talking about ideology. You're talking about people. Who's talking about people? And love. Marianne Williamson. Check her out. Substack. Transform with Marianne Williamson. Check it out. I mean, she's not a sponsor of the show or anything like that. I just have read her for the last couple of years and think she's inspiring, if nothing else. All right, one last word. Now, I save this for the last because it should be at the top, but it's not at the top. And I'm talking about the tapes that CNN found that have President Donald Trump sounding like he's playing with secret documents and saying, hey, wow, look at these. They're secret. Oh, I can't. Oh, you know what it says on page 15 of the indictment. Oh, I can't. I thought they're classified. You know, I can't declassify them now, but oh, here they are, secret. You know, in the old days, this would get to America and America would be like, oh my God, how can this man exist in our democracy? How can we have a man like this in our midst, thinking about being the leader of the free world? Oh, because he was before? What's going on? We've barely survived his tenure, and now people want to put him back. He's leading the Republican Party. So the question comes up, why is America so troubled that they can't react honestly and with disgust at the tape where it plays, or clearly it's Donald Trump in his own voice playing with documents that were subject or are subject to that indictment? There's no universal outcry like, oh my God, lock this man up. And it may just be that America is too gaslit. America is too tired. America is too used to the fact that politicians are corrupt beings. And it's a bad place to be as we approach July 4th, our 247th year of existence. Sad. I'm sad. I mean, I went through, I listened to the tapes, I listened to the reports, I listened to people's analysis. We are now, if you hadn't realized it yet, we're at the Watergate level. This is worse, right? And it still doesn't seem to register like, oh, well, we'll survive. Yeah. Maybe we're just too gaslit as a country. And the urgency. Because things would be different if people had that sense of urgency. Like, this is our country. What are we doing with it? Okay, that's our show for today. We're here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific, live for less than an hour. Originally, the show was entitled Emil in a Minute, but it just kept extending. But hopefully, yeah, you'll come back again. You'll share this with friends. This is show 247 or 547. Show 546 was good. Like I said, I go into that whole, not only do I talk about the affirmative action column with the New York Times folks, I also, I don't talk to them. I just read their script. I read their parts and I say, this is what an Asian American would say. But I also talk about Vincent Chin. And, you know, the Vincent Chin story. The sad thing is, in the 41st year, I think we're slipping. Oh, did someone say, I can't hear you? Oh my God. Someone said they can't hear me. They should have been able to hear me. I'm sorry, Joe Mark. You should be able to hear me. If not, okay. So I'm here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific live. Join me again tomorrow. We'll see. We'll see if the affirmative action thing. If the affirmative action thing hits. Oh, someone hears me. Thank goodness. Someone hears me. Okay. We're just waiting. We're waiting for the the Supreme Court. They got a couple big decisions. I say they'll do the wedding designer tomorrow, and then they'll do the and then some more on Thursday, and then Friday, boom, affirmative action. Then we're gone, and then people will be left like wondering what the. I know. Let's see. People know I like to meditate. Maybe that's why I like Marianne Williamson, because she's a meditator. But it's the loving kindness. It's metta, M-E-T-T-A. You show the love to others first, it comes back to you. It works. It works. I mean, it makes me less amok. Makes me a lot more reasonable. It does. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time, mahal